with you all tonight. And I just want to start, we have the accommodation for Leonard Brown's family. It doesn't have all those fancy words and nice little whereas's that where she went that she had, but I have for Leonard Brown and the family of Mr. Denver Smith. I was trying to keep notice to who was collecting for who, but I do have accommodations for Miss Prejean and Mr. Prejean. Mr. Ricky Hill and Mr. Harris. Patrick Robinson Jr. Brenda Williams. Mr. Willie Sanders. Chester Stevens. And Miss Charlene Hardman. Thank you so much. And again, on behalf of the Black Caucus, thank you so much for this occasion and inviting us out to share with you all this evening. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Moore, and I'm representative for District 17 that is in Monroe, Louisiana. It is certainly an honor and a privilege to be standing here with you all. And the reason why it is so important to me, because as I was hearing you all speak, I was only 14 then when this happened. And my great-grandmother, who grew up on a plantation and only had a 5th grade education, always instilled it in me at that time to go to college, and she only knew 2, and that was Grambling and Southern. And so I'll never forget that, and I pass that on with my children, my grandchildren, the choices that she gave me, only 2. And now, of course, it means so much more to me just to be on this stage with you all. God bless you, and thank you.
Some harms that suffered in the pursuit of justice were difficult to correct, but the passage of time we can at least respect those who fought for that cause and at least pay tribute to that cause. And I think, Professor Bell, for what you've done to bringing this to light and to correct the perspective, correct the narrative that was so distorted over time and over the years. But this is a perfect opportunity to do that. And it could have been me, because I came to Southern in fall of '73, and based on my activism on campus and as a student leader, I would have been at that scene at that time on that day. And it could have been me. So no parent who sends a child to a state institution with the expectation of protection and care should get the call that Brown and Smith parents got. That should never happen. So continue to fight for this, and never allow compromise and concessions to supersede your passion for justice. So as elected officials, when a cause of justice is choosing the right path, we should be at a meeting and we should help them move forward. Thank you.
Good evening, Edmund Jordan, State Representative, District 29. And look, I want to echo some of the sentiments. First of all, thank you for the sacrifice. Thank you for everything that you've done, because I too am a double graduate of Southern University, undergrad and law school. And I certainly want to thank my friend, Professor Bell. Professor Bell has a knack for uncovering history and making sure that people get recognized for their accomplishments. So those are and she does it in such a way that she tries to shy away from the spotlight, but we certainly need to place it upon her because, at least to some extent, because if not for her, this narrative would not be told and we would be stuck with a different narrative. But you know, as we come up to Thanksgiving and Bayou Classic, we learn something new every day. And one of the things that when I associate with Bayou Classic is the Board of Supervisors meeting, because they always meet the day before or the morning of the game. And throughout all that time, I've been to several of those meetings on campus and in New Orleans. And it never dawned upon me until today that it was the work of your group that even brought that board into existence. Because when you're living with something all your life, you just assume that's how it's always been. And so in '72, I was just one at the time, so have no recollection. I was living at the time, but had no recollection of it. So all my teenage life and adult life, Southern has always had a board of supervisors. And so I never known a time where they didn't have a board of supervisors, but to sit in the back and stand in the back today and find out that so many things came from your efforts. And it's shameful that some had to go elsewhere to continue their education. I know it's late, 50 years too late, but I'm happy that you guys have been recognized by the governor, by the president of the university, and by the state of Louisiana. And hopefully we can correct these wrongs and move forward. But again, thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you. So now I'm going to call up the LSU Cold Case Project panel, led by Professor Christopher Drew. He'll be moderating panel of students. Yeah, they're going to come to the podium.
Good evening. I'm Christopher Drew. I'm a journalism professor at LSU, and it's very humbling to be here today, follow the governor, and be up here with these leaders and especially with the families. Back in April, we met the Smith family at the Southern Law Center in a conference room, and not everybody in the family was, necessarily eager for us to pursue the story because it's obviously painful for everybody to relive this, and there have been so many investigations and nothing really came of anything. And all I could tell them was that I had 8 LSU students and 2 Southern students, 2 Southern law students, and we were going to do our very best to learn everything we could about all the people involved and everything that happened and what happened in the investigations of the shooting. So I never dreamed it would lead to Governor Edwards issuing an apology on behalf of the state. I hope that's helpful as horrible as the situation is. I just wanted to say quickly, because I know it's late, if you don't know our LSU Cold Case Project, we've been in existence for 13 years and we've investigated a lot of cases, and this is what we're really looking for. We're looking to bring out facts. We have the old-fashioned notion that probably many of you agree with, that facts matter. You know, we don't ascribe to other theories of, you know, fake news and less concerned about facts. We're trying to dig out the facts. And what we're aiming for is that if more facts are known, there can be more closure for the families and for the community and for the people who suffered. I just wanted to quickly say, Stanley Nelson, could you stand up? Back in 2007, when the Congress was getting ready to pass the Emmett Till Act to authorize the FBI to look again at some of the cold cases from the civil rights era, Stanley was editing a weekly newspaper in Faraday, Louisiana, and he found out one of the cases he'd never heard about was in his area. A shoe repair owner whose shop was firebombed, and he was killed by the Klan. And when Stanley did his first little story about it, the granddaughter of the man called him from California. Somebody had sent her the story, and she said, "I sure hope, you know, you'll find out more. You know, this is the most I've ever known." That set Stanley off on a quest. He solved that case, and in 2011 he was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize for his work on these cases. He's written 2 books, and he's now working with us as an adjunct professor on our cold case project. And just in the last 3 years, we did stories about the Deacons for Defense and Justice, the armed resistance group. If you can imagine, we had a young black student at LSU who interviewed one of the few deacons who actually shot a white man, and then she called the white man who the deacon had shot. And you can imagine, she called me up as soon as the interview was over and said, "You're not going to believe it, but this white man said, you know, times are different, and you know, I don't have any hard feelings about it anymore. You know, I don't believe what I used to believe then." And last year we did a series about a white sanitation businessman up in the Monroe area in 1960. He killed 4 of his workers and wounded another one. And as you might imagine, with the way the justice system locally worked then, Mr. Fuller, the businessman, was not charged. He said self-defense. The one black worker who survived was charged with threatening Mr. Fuller. And ultimately, our students found 3 new witnesses. One was 94, next door neighbor of Mr. Fuller's. One was 93, the sister of 2 of the men who were killed. 94-year-old woman was able to tie Fuller's son to the murders and help us show that it was really an ambush by Fuller and his son because he didn't want to pay the men. And the sister, the 93-year-old sister, had never been able to tell her story, and she knew what happened because the survivor told her what happened. And we were running the stories one a week, so the weekly newspapers around the state could run them too. And the second day of the series, much like our Southern series, was the day of the shooting, and we had her story in that. And right after that story ran, she got COVID, and she died 3 days later. And she told her family and her friends, "Thank goodness somebody heard my story, somebody put my story out." So that's what we're trying to do. And I'm going to have 3 of my students just very briefly tell you what the main findings in our Southern series were, if you hadn't had a chance to read it. We have brochures in the back with our website address if you want to look at all the information, some of our past cases you can. And before I turn it over to them, I just want to call out Brittany again, because I did not want to do this story just as an LSU project. And I talked first to Southern journalism, but the main professor was going on vacation, on sabbatical, and it didn't work out. So I reached out to Professor Bell, and she said, "I've got somebody who can help you." Brittany Dunn. So before I could call Brittany, Brittany called me, and I'm talking to her, and I was telling her what we're trying to do, and I could pay her for up to 20 hours a week to work with us. And I said, "What else do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm a 3rd-year law student. I have a full-time data analyst job with the state of Louisiana, and I sell real estate, but I'd be happy to help." And I said, "I don't know when you're going to have time to give us any help, but My God, as everyone up here knows, she's amazing, right? And you could tell by the command she had of everyone's stories how amazing she is. So thank you, Brittany. I'll let my students introduce themselves as they come up. Thank you all.
Good evening, my name is Claire Sullivan and I've been working with the Cold Case Project for the last year. I'm a journalism student at LSU. So just to start off, we chose to write this series as a narrative because it was important to us to capture the weeks leading up to this confrontation, and it was also important to us to capture the stories of the families and the stories of these men who were often ignored in the contemporary news accounts. There was really no sense of who they were as people or their lives. It was really just about their deaths. So it was important to us to capture that, and we are so grateful to the families and to the protesters that spoke to us and allowed us to do that, because we really wanted to be able to tell those stories, and that's why we decided to write it the way that we did. It was also important to us to set the historical context of this event and show all that led up to it. So there were two recent examples of other HBCUs that had had protests, and this kind of set potential paths for how Southern could have reacted. So in 1968, there was Howard University, and there was 1,000 student protesters who had occupied their administration building for 4 days. But it ended peacefully because the administrators were willing to negotiate and talk with students, and it led to many of the same changes that Southern students wanted at the time, such as incorporating Black studies into the curriculum. And so that was one path that showed how these protests could be resolved peacefully and with change. There was also the Jackson State University example, which ended with 2 students dead. And unfortunately, they had called in law enforcement, and that led to those deaths. And we saw a similar path being taken at Southern University, and so that kind of sets the context for what may have been on the minds of those administrators at the time. And from our review of these materials, we understand that they called law enforcement onto campus several times leading up to that day. And that morning, they were calling law enforcement frantically, saying that Netterville had been taken captive. Of course, we know that's not true. Then they called and said it was a security guard who had been taken captive, which was again not true. So it was important to us to capture those things and kind of set the historical context and also the context at Southern to really back up what may have been going through those administrators' minds when they made those choices and how those choices may have led to the deaths of Denver Smith and Leonard Brown. And I'll pass it on to Drew Hawkins to talk about the files we reviewed.
Hello, my name is Drew Hawkins. I'm a journalist from Algiers, New Orleans, and a graduate student at LSU. I want to take a really quick second to acknowledge and recognize the Smith and Brown family. I'm seeing Mr. Denver, Mr. Nelson, Ms. Evelyn Turner. It's really great to see you guys. I'm really honored and grateful to be in this space, to be here in this moment, and these incredible panels as well. So I had a whole long thing prepared, but I know that it's late, so I'm going to kind of get through it really quickly. Like Professor Chris said, our focus here was the facts, right? And over the past 50 years, certain aspects of the story have been reported, but especially when it comes to the state grand jury and the FBI, Department of Justice investigations, all that we really knew was that the state grand jury, and some people may have known that there was also a federal grand jury in 1974, was held and no indictments were returned, no true bill, end of the story. We were very fortunate. Mr. Denver Terrence passed on some FBI reports that he had. Ms. Ola passed on over 2,000 pages that Mr. Fred had. And Professor Bell also was able to share with us reports from the Department of Justice. So we were able to go through that, and some of those facts and these things that have been misreported. I think Dr. Hill mentioned earlier that news reports had initially said that President Netterville was being held hostage, and using heavily redacted FBI reports and piecing that together with in-person personal interviews and a few reports from the Department of Justice, able to kind of definitively prove that not only was he not held hostage, in his own interviews he said he wasn't held hostage, and other Southern officials did confirm that he asked students to wait for him. These are key critical facts that we had to kind of pinpoint. And if y'all had seen the amount of documents, and Brittany can attest to this, the amount of research that's gone into it, we knew that was really important. I would refer you to come check out our series. We spent a lot of time interviewing dozens of people, many of people on this stage here, many other people in the room here, and going through almost 3,000 pages of documents to as accurately tell the story as we could. One of the things that, like I mentioned, where the FBI and Department of Justice aspects in the state grand juries were underreported because people didn't know a lot about it. And our reporting really showed that the Department of Justice, especially at the direction of J. Stanley Pottinger, who was the head of the Civil Rights Division at that time, really put an earnest effort into trying to pinpoint the shooter. And they were able to narrow it down further from the group of 6 that the Gus Commission that Mr. Shababu referenced earlier, that they were able to kind of narrow it down, which is what DA O.C. Brown used for his state grand jury. So the FBI was able to get even closer, ultimately not being able to fully definitively name the individual. But there was a lot more work than I think people had realized, and the earnest effort, I think, is worth knowing and worth reporting. So, as best we could, obviously we will never be able to fully tell every single bit about the story, but we wanted to give it as best we could to fully definitively lay the true history out for posterity, maybe some sort of healing, and especially for the families. Thank you. I'm gonna pass also, it sounds like it was all full of success and different things like that. There were plenty of roadblocks. We're very grateful for everyone who was comfortable talking with us and sharing our stories. I was going to turn it over to Adrian, who I would say personally experienced some of those roadblocks of, people not necessarily willing to talk about what happened, maybe by the nature of their position or their involvement, also maybe just their memory, or maybe, no, it's not his personality, he's like, but, just weren't willing to share things. So he will tell you about some of his experience getting in touch with people. I mean, so many. So I'll pass it on to Adrian DeBose.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to acknowledge the Garner Smith family and acknowledge my great and excellent panelists this evening. I know that we did write a great story, but I know I can't say that I'm grateful sincerely, because I would never want a loss of life to be the result of a great story, but I am glad that I was part of the team. And I'm glad that I was able to meet the families and the protesters and everyone that we did talk to. I did have a lot of roadblocks, but I used it as adversity, because this whole time talking to the Assistant District Attorney, Anthony Graffia, talking to U.S. Attorney Steve Mayo, it was very interesting just learning how they investigated, from Mr. Mayo telling us how him and Jeffrey Wilden spread out a whole table like this of pictures, analyzing how they found the location of the shot, from Anthony Graffia first telling me he knew the whole story, then later rebutting because he said that it was just too painful to just talk about, and ultimately hanging up in my face after they keep on calling him. But I respected it just because I knew it's 50 years, and just the fact that we did this time it's too far to actually know who killed them personally, but just from looking at all the documents, we wanted to tell the story from the point of views from the people who weren't in those documents. So talking to everyone and seeing everything that we found out was a great, and I'm grateful for this experience. And I hope that it brought people peace, even though we couldn't bring everything to justice. And please make sure you check out the brochure. There's the website of the LSU Cold Case Project. They have all of the files. You can check the documents yourself with the Gus report, all the FBI's from the undacted and the redacted, and you can read the stories from the past experience, not just the Brown and Smith case, but all the cases that LSU has done in the past, and you can check it out for yourself. The documents there, the facts are there, and thank y'all for your time, and have a blessed night. I forgot to mention that I graduated from LSU Manship School of Mass Communications, and I'm a second-year law student at Southern University Law School.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce you to a 16-year-old who is going to read a poem that was written in 1972 and is published in the 1972 yearbook.
If we all became bitter. Southern Baton Rouge was the setting, and not for some time will people be forgiven. Time moves, things change. Hopes and ambitions seem so out of reach. Making steps only to find you're not moving ahead, but 10 steps behind. Need is now, must get ahead. Strive too hard and suddenly dead. Denver Smith and Leonard Brown, one Thursday morning, wholly shot down. Watched it happen, dead inside. Hurt so deeply, could have never cried. Injustice done by officials of state, punish them, yes. But don't be blinded by hate. Seek the truth, follow its lights. Wisdom and perseverance will be your mind. Things are bad, but always consider how will it be if we all became better.
Now we're going to hear from Attorney William Most from the Alumni Association. And following him, we're going to just please have you come right on up afterward to talk about the First Amendment, and that is William Most.
Good evening. My name is William Most. I'm a civil rights attorney here in Louisiana. And what I'm here to talk briefly about is continuity. Continuity between 1972 and 2022. My firm litigates cases in which law enforcement retaliates against people for their exercise of free speech, free assembly. And from that, I can tell you there is continuity. There is not a break between that day and today. Now, as then, Louisiana officers too often react to free speech with violence and arrests. I'll give you a couple examples. In July of 2016, Baton Rouge officers shot Alton Sterling to death, and in the days that followed, citizens took to the streets to peacefully protest his killing. But law enforcement reacted with force, as they did in 72. Police officers, sheriff's deputies, and state troopers came to Baton Rouge from around the state and reacted with violence. They reacted with rifles, body armor, an armored vehicle. They reacted with a sonic cannon that designed for military use that had never been tested. They reacted with zip ties and handcuffs. One protester was beaten so badly that officers fractured his eye socket, causing his eye to bulge out of his head, although his paperwork said he was arrested without incident. That wasn't the 1970s, that was 2016. All in all, officers arrested about 200 peaceful protesters. And not just protesters, reporters, photographers, people just trying to get back to their car. For almost all of them, charges were dismissed. That same year, a man in Terrebonne Parish started a website to highlight public corruption in his parish, including the sheriff. But instead of addressing corruption, the sheriff's office raided the man's house, arrested him, and seized his computers. In 2019, the same thing happened. A man in St. Tammany Parish sent private emails criticizing a sheriff's office failure to solve a murder. But instead of working harder to solve the murder, the deputies obtained warrants for the man's emails, arrested him for criminal defamation. They didn't solve the murder. In 2020, after the killing of George Floyd, people in New Orleans took to the streets like persons in other cities. The New Orleans Police Department responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. And for 5 days, the police denied that they had fired any shots at all, until forced to admit that they had. And just last year, the city of Baton Rouge tried to put a law professor in jail for sharing video with the CBS Evening News that showed police misconduct, even though the video was already a public record. I mention these examples to impress upon you that when law enforcement reacts to free speech and protest with violence and arrests, that's not just the past. That's the present, but it doesn't have to be our future. So let this not just be an occasion, let this be an opportunity to learn from the past, an opportunity to apply those lessons to the present, An opportunity to make clear that our law enforcement is supposed to protect us, not police our speech. An opportunity to make clear that peaceful protest is a right guaranteed to us by the U.S. Constitution, fought for us by the people on this stage, and not a crime to be punished. Because if we go forward, guided by the lives that were lost and the sacrifices of the people here today, then with every action we take, we deepen their legacy. Thank you.
We're going to now go from Stanley White of the Alumni Association. And afterward, we're going to hear from the families.
Good evening, everyone. I will try not to take too much time. It has been a long evening, but I was contacted by Brittany Dunn in October of 2021 as she was looking to connect with students who were here on campus, in Southern's campus, in 1972 when this happened. I was able to put Brittany in contact with many of my classmates, and it took me over a year to reconnect, locate my electrical engineering classmate, Chester Stevens. I finally located and contacted Chester on the Thursday before homecoming game, and I was able to put him in touch with Brittany Dunn. Chester was an electrical engineering student, so was I, and he was expelled. He was banned from campus. He was arrested, he was assaulted, and somehow his name did not show up on the list of the 9 students that Governor John Bell Edwards, I don't know if the terminology gave the resolution to tonight. I don't know why his name didn't show up on the list. Chester was actually in the courtroom when the court case went on. He is in the pictures in the courtroom, in the student union building. So I don't know if he can explain why his name is not on the list or not, but certainly he was also wrong in the process. And he was very willing and able to talk about it, to connect with Ms. Brittany Dunn, to contribute, and has reconnected with Dr. Ricky Hill, who I spoke with earlier today. The other thing I'd like to say is that I am very happy to know that the governor identified the names of all of the student leaders who were enjoined or banned from campus, expelled, had to go elsewhere for their education. And you can see how serious they were about their education, because all of them went on to get their education elsewhere. They didn't let this obstacle turn them around. They didn't let it turn them back. They didn't let them stop. And many of them have risen to the height